It helps us, doesn't it, Dave, to see geopolitics in the form of a broader narrative, in particular the attempt to destabilize Russia, potentially because of a burgeoning partnership and set of treaties that they've cultivated with China. Now, of course, America's, every time I say China, I want to say China. Their relationship with China is, of course, in the headlines because of that terrifying, awful, bloody balloon. But also, there is a wider global narrative about U.S. hegemony and unipolar intentions and the potential for China and Russia to disrupt that. Are we likely to see this story becoming increasingly incendiary over coming weeks, months, years, Dave?
Yeah, and one point is that the people running American foreign policy, the neocons who control it, and the other people, part of the deep state, there's different factions, and some of them are not very smart. And those are the ones right now that are controlling the Biden administration, I think, Tony Blinken, Victoria Nuland. What they're doing to Russia and China clearly is going to bring them closer together. They're both facing Western sanctions. They're both facing Western military buildups, and now they're shaking hands and making deals. And it's creating this kind of new, like you said, multipolar world potentially with Russia, China, Iran, even Venezuela, all these countries that are being sanctioned by the U.S. They're kind of creating this enemy. And we know that, just look at the history of the U.S. foreign policy. They've done this before. They opened up China and got all this industry there and really built them up. And now over the past few years, China has really become the boogeyman. So now there's a lot to this China thing in the balloon. And right now, what people have to do is just stop for a moment and not get kind of whipped up into a frenzy about this scary Chinese spy balloon that went over the U.S. You really have to ask questions. And the big thing, I think, is that so China says it's a weather balloon. The U.S. says it's a spy balloon. China says it accidentally drifted over the U.S. Who knows? It's not exactly clear. Then you have the Pentagon saying this has happened before. And one thing I pointed out in my article that I wrote up about it, it's on antiwar.com today, is that just a few years ago, surveillance aircraft from a foreign country over the U.S. wouldn't really be that big of a deal because the U.S. and Russia had a treaty called Open Skies, and it allowed unarmed surveillance flights over each other's territory. Trump pulled out of it in 2020. Russia actually tried to salvage it, but the Biden administration rejected the offer. That was another thing that led up to this war, is the decline of arms control treaties between the U.S. and Russia. So anyway, so maybe a balloon floating over the U.S. for a little while wouldn't have really raised alarms back then before this treaty was scrapped. I'm not really sure, but we have to ask these questions. And the timing of this whole balloon thing, the Pentagon announcing it right before Blinken is supposed to go to China. And Blinken cancels his trip. And it shows what a pathetic diplomat he is. Right now, what he should be doing is, there's a balloon. This could be an issue between the U.S. and China. I got to get on the phone. I got to get over there and talk to them about this. But no, of course, he cancels the trip. When it comes to Russia, Blinken has totally failed as a diplomat since Russia invaded. You would think if you're the top diplomat in the United States, you would try to be talking to Russia every day to stop this war. But nope, he cut off communication with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. They only spoke one time that we know of, at least, since Russia invaded, and that was to discuss a prisoner swap. So he's a totally failed diplomat. But I think that might have something to do with the timing of the announcement by the Pentagon. Of course, also people did just see it. They looked up and saw it. So who knows if the previous ones were that visible. But this is against the backdrop of this U.S. military buildup in the Asia Pacific. Just last week, the U.S. announced it's opening 4 new military facilities in the Philippines. The week before that, the U.S. Marine Corps opened a new base on Guam. And these Marine leaders, these military leaders in the Asia Pacific, they say they're doing this to prepare for war with China. Just a few weeks back, the top U.S. Marine Corps commander in Japan told Financial Times that they're increasing cooperation with Japan, the Philippines. We're doing this, we call it setting the theater, as we set the theater in Ukraine after 2014, comparing it directly to that war. And now with Taiwan, of course, is the big one. If you remember last summer, Nancy Pelosi's little stunt, she went over there and it provoked the largest Chinese military drills around Taiwan that have ever happened. They fired missiles over the island. They simulated a blockade. They never did that before. It was clear China was going to react like that. She went anyway. And now we have Kevin McCarthy, the new House Speaker. He's saying he's going to go too. And Taiwan's a tricky one because a lot of people don't understand the situation. But since 1979, the U.S. has not had diplomatic relations with Taiwan. That was how they opened up with China. It's the foundation of U.S.-China relations, is kind of this weird scenario. And you could go back further. U.S. intervention in the Chinese Civil War, backing Chiang Kai-shek when the Kuomintang fled to Taiwan. The U.S. intervening militarily in the 1950s to stop Mao from trying to take Taiwan. All this stuff is very important that people need to understand. But right now, what we've seen in the past few years, starting really under the Trump administration, is that they're changing the relationship from Taiwan. It used to be kind of an issue between the US and China, and now they're using it as an opportunity to kind of poke China. And, you know, these visits, Nancy Pelosi going over there is a big deal because she was the Speaker of the House, and that China views that as an affront to the One China policy. The U.S. has been selling them more weapons. The National Defense Authorization Act, the 2023 military spending bill that Biden just signed, include military aid for Taiwan for the first time ever. They've always sold them weapons. They've never financed the purchase. And China reacted, more drills around Taiwan. They're telling us, if you keep doing this, this could lead to war between the U.S. and China. They're telling us outright, but they're not listening. So it's going to be a similar situation where the U.S. is going to potentially provoke a war over Taiwan. And just like the US and Russia, the US and China cannot go to war. China doesn't have nearly as many nukes as Russia and the US do, but they still have plenty to destroy the world if there was a nuclear exchange. And the narrative, if you see people telling you that Joe Biden is owned by China, that's just a false narrative, because yes, Hunter Biden made some money over there, but if you paid attention to Biden's foreign policy, he's been tougher on China than Trump was. He's increased all these sanctions, trying to cripple their semiconductor industry, and not just U.S. sanctions. They're trying to get the Netherlands and Japan to get in on these sanctions. And again, these military buildups. And his Pentagon, his State Department, the CIA, the FBI, just about every federal agency under Biden has said China is our number one threat, our top enemy. So we have to think very cautiously about all this balloon frenzy when that is the backdrop. That's the situation we're in today. U.S.-China relations are so low.
Stay free with Russell Brand. See it first on Rumble.